Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Welcome to Daftaboutcraft, episode 47 of the craft beer podcast, with me, Dave D. And this is usually where Dave B would say, me, Dave B, but he's not here. And the reason he's not here is because his wife Katie happily gave birth to their son, Rob B, just a few days ago. So Dave B has become Daddy B, and he's having some well-deserved rest, a little bit of time off, but he will be back soon, very soon. But this bit of this episode doesn't feature him. So what we're going to do with episode 47, instead of having all our usual features, we've got for you an extended interview with Harry from the Mill Hill Brew Co. in Enderby in Leicestershire. It's a really fascinating chat, which Dave and myself did a week or so ago. So we're going to bring that to you on this episode. And then all our usual bits and pieces will be back very soon. So keep an eye out on your Spotify and your iTunes, whichever is your podcast provider, and you should get an alert when our next episode drops, but then that one will have all the usual goodies in, featuring Brew to Me, Tried and Tested, The Brewer's Wife, everything else we usually have for you. We were considering anyway doing a Mill Hill special, as Harry from Mill Hill was a great talker, said some great stuff, had a lovely conversation with him and some great beers, so we thought we'd run it in its entirety, let you listen to it all, then give you our usual stuff very, very soon as Dave is back up to full power and has got fully charged up with some sleep. But look, massive congratulations to Katie and Dave, and welcome to the world, Rob B. And like Dave said in his Facebook and Instagram posts, if you happen to see that, we hope he doesn't grow up to be a macro lager drinker. But we'll teach him best we can anyway. Well done to Dave and Katie. Thanks for listening to this latest episode. And here's our chat with Mill Hill. Regular listeners might remember that a few episodes ago we tried a beer for the very first time on our Brew to Me section from Mill Hill Brew Co. in Leicester. Dave had the beer, didn't you, Dave? Do you remember?
I did, because Leicester is my old stomping ground before I moved back home, I suppose. Mill Hill are based in Enderby, which I remember very well. And it's a pleasure to have Harry, the head brewer and all things Mill Hill, with us. Good evening, Harry. How are you?
Good evening, Dave D and Dave B. It's fantastic to be here. I'm really good. It's an actual pleasure to be on the podcast, having listened to it to and fro my house to the brewery over the last few weeks and months. So it's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. When Dave had that beer on Brew to Me, he loved it. And shortly afterwards, I found one of your beers on cask somewhere. I thought, I've got to try this. And it was amazing. My wife was with me. She still talks about your beer on cask now. She talked about it just a couple of days ago, funny enough. It's a beer that really sticks in our minds, so we're really glad to have you on to have a chat with us and to have some of your beers to drink as well, which we're very excited about.
Where do you want to start, guys? Do you want to start with a beer or...?
I reckon we open a beer. What do you think, Dave?
I think it's probably actually more sensible if you open the lager as well. While we open these beers and get them poured, how long has Mill Hill been in existence, Harry? How long have you been going and how did it all come about?
There's two parts to Mill Hill. There's the Cask and the Coffee, which is our micro pub in Enderby. That's been going for 5 years. And then there's the brewery, which has been open for 18 months and is based in the same town, Enderby, just outside of Leicester. So the brewery was really inspired off the back of the Cask and Coffee micro pub. So that was started by my sister and my brother-in-law, Jay. So it's a completely family affair, everything to do with Mill Hill Brew Co. And they started it through a passion for beer and coffee. And what ended up happening was them building a really great community of people and drinkers in Enderby. And the brewery really fed off the back of that. They were selling really exciting hazy beers, also like getting really good beers in cask, hazy beers in cask from Almasty and things. And I came home one time from Liverpool because that's where I was studying, and I had a cask of Almasty hazy 0.2% Mosaic Pale Ale, and it was like a cask beer I'd never tried before. This was about 4 years ago. And I thought it'd be amazing to brew hazy pale ales like that. So excited by vibrant beers and flavours and bringing some of those to cask, but also we were really wanting to build on the community that was at Mill Hill and wanting to share that message a bit wider through the brewery, and also the sense of place. We're all from Leicester as well.
So when you say you wanted to start brewing beer, you hadn't brewed any beer before?
So a misspent youth to begin with, Dave. When I'll say 18 for the purpose of the listeners, I dug my dad's homebrew kit, 1970s homebrew kit, out the back of his garage.
Nice.
And I'm sure there's a lot of brewers out there who might have started with the same book as me, which was Dave Lyne's How to Brew the Beers You Buy. And in a good homebrew spirit, I selected the strongest beer that you could brew out of that book. It was a really good nightcap. Let's put it that way. And so I've been brewing really since then. And my homebrew setup got more and more complex with time. I went to university in Manchester and I studied chemistry there. But my real involvement in anything to do with the craft beer scene was in Liverpool. I spent 6 years there in the city and got involved with a lot of brewers during lockdown, actually. Me and two good friends, we decided we'd start a beer box company, and we wanted to champion local breweries, get their cans out there and go and do video blogs and things. So that's how I really then got involved with a lot of brewers, and we did a couple of collaborations through that. And I kind of caught the bug. And then, funnily enough, a bit later on during the whole lockdown, George gives me a ring and says, there's an industrial unit come up in Enderby. Would you be interested in exploring the opportunity of opening up a brewery? Because even though it's not ended out like this in due course, during lockdown, it was actually really quite hard to get hold of beer off people, especially in fresh cask and hazy cask and things. And part of the reason we wanted to do it as well was through that. But it's not worked out like that. There's an abundance of incredible beer, as you can always expect. That's where it really then started to become this idea of becoming the brewery and get serious.
So as far as brewing the actual beer yourself, I always love this. You're completely self-taught then?
Yeah, in terms of brewing beer, self-taught. I did chemistry, so that's given me a good background of thinking all of science, and a bit of a bookworm. So I've read my way through plenty of Scott Janish and how to brew and lots of books and learning. And then also just having the benefit of brewing with some people during lockdown and having a lot of fun. That was also a real learning experience for me too.
As a bit of the mad scientist background then, is the most important thing when you put together a beer the water? Because that's what we usually find with the scientific approach.
I think it can really elevate a beer. So at our brewery, we've got a reverse osmosis system installed. So all the water that comes in gets completely stripped of all the minerals, and then I remineralize it for every single recipe, set the pHs. And I do think it's really important. pH is incredibly important. A sour beer tastes sour, and you can get some pale ales, which start to, some yeasts as well, pale ale yeast, which especially Kvike yeasts, which really drop the pH of your beer and give you something tangy. So you've got to start and offset that to give yourself a rounded beer flavour if you're using some of those. And I think it's really important, yeah, Dave.
So the reverse osmosis, to put this into perspective for our listeners, how many breweries would operate like that?
I think a lot of the bigger ones, and also it depends where you are. In Leicester, unfortunately, we don't have the best water for brewing things like a lager or a pale ale. We've got cracking water if you want to brew an amber or a dark beer. Bearing in mind, the main thing we wanted to do was hazy pales to begin with, and we knew that also lagers was something we'd want to build into that portfolio. We had to go down that route of taking the minerals out. Where I was homebrewing for a long time up in Liverpool, the water was brilliant and the mineral levels were so low and the alkalinity also low. So you really could just add things on top of that and not have to do reverse osmosis.
You've mentioned your lager there a couple of times. We've both got the lager in front of us. Mine's nearly gone, actually. How are you getting on with yours, Dave?
Well, I'm not stuck in a hot loft like you are, so I am taking a bit more time with it. Now, I'm interested because you said just before we came on, this tastes different. I agree, and I'm interested to know why. So my reaction to it is, The first couple of times I had a sip, I could then taste it before I'd had another sip. It really lingered. Crisp, I got quite nutty, almost dry roasted nuts, which I hope isn't offensive, but that's what I was getting. That kind of sort of, I want to keep going back to it. And it doesn't taste like sort of dry roasted peanuts. I don't want that to be what I'm suggesting, but it does have that quite nutty, dry taste to it. Is that what you were sort of aiming for, or?
Basically, most lagers they're brewed with a traditional lager yeast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this particular lager, we've actually experimented and we've used one of the cleanest Kvike strains that you can for a lager.
Right.
That's enabled us, which is really important, to have a shorter time in the tank. And also, we've used Mandarina Bavaria hops in addition to Saz. So there is an element of the traditional there, but for me, it's more fruity, not as clean as a lager, done with a traditional long lagering time. But a lot of the people we've tried it on as well have said it's more flavoursome. You're the first person to mention dry net roasted nuts, but I think also we've used a Europils malt, which is like a malt that's particularly for English style breweries brewing lagers. And then we've also added some melanoidin, which can add some slightly honey notes in there as well. And there's some Vienna in there too. And that's probably where you're starting to get some of those richer notes in there from.
For me, it was definitely a bit more fruity than I would imagine a lager would be, and a bit more malty as well. And the colour is more orangey than I would usually expect a lager to be.
It comes from the Vienna malt, basically, that's in it, and the melanoidin malt.
Yeah, I'm going to stand by the fact that for my palate, slightly nutty, but it's no problem at all. I really like that. I could have a packet of nuts with this, and that'd be even better, because I'd just keep going back to one to the other to the other. It's definitely different. Before I forget, because he's on every can, before we sort of carry on, I want to talk about Clive as well, and how Clive came into being, because he is the Mill Hill mascot.
We really wanted our cans to have a sense of place, but also be vibrant and fun. And there was this event that was called Rocket Round Leicester, and it was run by Loris Hospice. And lots of local artists, got involved in this project when we were actually looking who to work with. And Sam Grubb, who's the artist behind our designs, painted one of these rockets, and it was covered in all of these incredible designs of his and monsters and characters. And Jay and I looked at it and we thought, what about a juice monster? And then Jay just came up with the name Clive. I don't know where. We do random brainstormings and we have a little tab where we come up with crazy beer names. And we were just in a meeting one day and we went with Clive. It's no one related to us. It's no one's cute, fluffy dog. And I like to think that he hides at the back of the cold store and only lets out the best beers. And he's our quality control, really, Clive is.
We'll put a picture of Clive up on socials, because Clive the Juice Monster, I would say it does work, because your cans stand out so much. I love the artwork on these. I notice, obviously, listeners can't see, but you've got a T-shirt with Clive on it, and I'm as big a sucker for I'm as big a sucker for merch as you can get. So I'm definitely going to have to get myself a Clive Juice Monster T-shirt, because I think that's brilliant.
Proof of how well Clive works as a marketing tool is that when I went to the fridge just now, it's really, really full at the moment. And I thought, it's going to take me ages to find these Mill Hill cans. And I found them instantly because of Clive just leaps out at you. So it really does work. And on a busy shelf, I can see that your cans would stand out a mile.
It's good to hear that, especially as the lager that you're drinking is in the Leicester City away colours, I have to say, which were made famous when we were previously in the Championship and may well return.
Throughout all of this, Leicester is a very big thing here. It's an integral part of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's where we all grew up. All of my family are based here. As I said, it's where strong communities of drinkers has been built around Mill Hill Cask and Coffee. Coming into this as well, there are really established breweries in Leicester. We wanted to join that company, but really do our own thing. And we felt that there was an opportunity, really, to collaborate with local artists, to really build an image based around the city and also around local independents too. So I think in the previous episode, you had the cocoa and coffee beer, and that was made with cocoa nibs sourced from a local chocolatier and coffee beans from a local roastery. And there's so many great producers in Leicester. It's not just beer, you know. There's Melton Mowbray pork pies, there's Stilton cheese, there's it's just an incredible place for food and drink culture.
Are we going to get a pork pie beer?
Oh, I don't think that'll work. Maybe something with some spices in. I'd recommend pork pie on the side.
But these days, anything goes with beer, doesn't it? But I've never heard of a pork pie beer. No.
Maybe you should try the stout with Stilton.
Yeah, that might work. So what do you want to do then, beer-wise? You talked about the hazy beers and stuff. I've got a sour here to drink in a minute, which I'm really looking forward to. And you've done the stout. You've already covered, in quite a short amount of time, quite a lot of different styles.
It should be said as well, that was a white stout, if people haven't listened to the previous episode, which is very different. And that's what jumped out to me. Like, that was a brave choice of style to go for, really, because you don't see that many white stouts, and I don't actually see that many that really nail it. I really enjoyed that one, and when you sent it, it came with the chocolate from the chocolatier, and that was another level. That just showed the sort of pairings you can do for stuff. So probably why Dave's suggesting doing beer with a pork pie. But as he says, what kind of things are you after? You've already covered quite a few. What other ones what other styles would you like to have a go at?
Should we talk about the sour a bit? A pound is what gets shouted by many a market seller in Leicester Market. And it's a sound I can remember from being about 4 or 5 years old. In Leicester Market, there's an astounding array of fruit and vegetables, and also there's a great fish market. There's lots of great produce on offer in the city centre. And what that beer has been inspired by is the seasonality of the produce that you can get there. So the whole idea behind that, and this is the most exciting project for us really, because every 3 months we want to change the fruit in it and always use seasonal fruit. So it's going to keep the name and just rotate. It'll be V1, V2, V3, and they'll be pound a pound. But every 3 months there'll be seasonal ingredients in. So that's something I kind of like to tap into, Dave, making some seasonal beers. It's not possible with everything. We can't grow US hops here and get some of the flavours that you can from those hops, but you can with fruit. So that's one of the things we'd like to tap into.
Idiots like me who love sours and just get completely addicted by branding and different versions, we're just going to buy all of them. So that's fantastic. Yeah, I'll be all over that, and I'm sure a lot of other people will as well. This is the first one, is it?
Yeah, and that's brewed with 200 grams a litre of strawberries. Obviously, the season just coincided with starting brewing that beer.
So presumably once we get to autumn, we'll be looking at your sort of hedgerow fruits, your blackberries and gooseberries. And
I'm wondering whether we can squeeze a slightly early one in with maybe some stone fruits and things like that. Then really go for a late autumn one with, definitely lots of blackberries and dark fruits. Quite excited by that one, because this first one, we've gone for an approachable kind of sour. So it's got the lactose in, balance out the sour, and strawberry's quite a sweet fruit. I wanted to do that to kind of almost make a bit of a gateway sour, because we're growing our market and exploring along with the people who drink our beers. And so I wanted the first one to be the most approachable, and things might get a little bit crazier as we go through each iteration, and a bit more lip-smackingly tart.
I guess the main outlet for your beers is your own place, isn't it?
It started that way.
What I was going to say is that a lot of your customers there may well have not ever got involved with sours before. This may be their first dabble with a sour. So, I completely get it that you'd want to make it accessible.
It's also that we're stocked in a lot of places, which we're probably the most adventurous craft listing for them on the shelf, farm shops and delis and things like that around Leicester. And it's going to be a new style to those drinkers too, who are kind of exploring a few of those beers through our range as well.
So what's it like then, Dave? You've had a sip. It looked amazing when you held it up to the camera so we could see the colour on it.
Glorious colour, isn't it? Really deep and vibrant. I used to love a bit of lactose in a sour. When we first started the podcast, I was all over it, and I went through a spell of really liking that. Now I'd rather have beers without lactose, but this is done with a subtle hand. It's not heaped in there so it's overwhelmingly sweet or anything. There's a nice balance of the tart and the sweet. It's very nice, really nice, and the strawberry shines through as well.
I'm glad you're enjoying it, Dave.
Absolutely. Can't wait for the next ones in the series. And this is 6%.
Yeah.
Doesn't taste 6%.
Place you're going, you're making me thinking I might need to go meet you at the clock tower at the fridge.
I think you probably will.
So are you just a one-man band in the brewery then when you're doing all this?
The brewery is pretty much my domain in terms of brewing all of the beers, the recipe creation. And then outside of that, Jay really helps with the sales. He's got a lot of connections through the cask as well, both local bars, but also backwards through distributors and things like that, which has really helped get beers out to you guys, actually, in a way. So we're very fortunate in that regard. And Georgie is she's the glue that holds us all together, you know. She keeps everything ticking, and she did accountancy, so she also helps us not get HMRC on her back. She's a good thing when you've got a business and you're a small business to have an accountant with you too. Yeah, it's a good team. I can only take credit for the beer, and the rest is real teamwork. And we're often out together. Tonight I was at a Taste the Place event, which was done by Visit Leicester. Just before coming onto the podcast, I was at a farm shop and giving a talk there about the brewery. So, you know, when you start a microbrewery, I think you feel like you'll be brewing a beer and taking it out to people and showcasing the beer. But what it actually involves is being a brewer, a cleaner, well, mostly a cleaner, an electrician sometimes, a plumber, you name it. It all needs doing in a brewery. So it's more than I thought to begin with.
Do you find it annoying sometimes that you can't just focus on making the beers, or are you happy to do all the other stuff as well?
I'd love it if everything ran smoothly, but having known lots of brewers before I started this and talking to them, things are always going wrong, especially when you're in a small brew house and you've got to confront these issues yourself. They can get in your way and they can get you down sometimes. You have to just keep a focus on the positives when things like that happen. Fortunately for us, our beers have been really well received. That, as the brewer, that keeps me going all the time and keeps me motivated. And these are the things they're things you have to just step over, isn't it? And not dwell on. Fortunately, when you've got your family around you, that's an easier thing to do.
Definitely.
So Dave said earlier about what else do you want to do beer-wise and that. What would you like to do with the sort of business as a whole? Do you have grand plans to take over all of Leicester and Leicestershire, or do you want to we find increasingly when we speak to people, if they can carve their niche and make it a viable business and everyone's happy and they get to make great beer and people enjoy it, that's enough. Where do you sort of stand on that? What would you like to do?
Well, you asked me about like the challenges that you have to overcome as a brewery. There's the things that every day that happen, but there's also the route to profitability. There's also actually getting there. In today's market, I think that's harder than ever. And we've found that. It's not been an easy 18 months, just finding our feet with that. And we're a nano brewery. We're already really stretched for capacity. So we're producing as much beer as we can. So what we want is to share our beer in Leicester and beyond, showcase the city, showcase producers through what we're doing, but also just produce really good beer and make sure people are enjoying it and be featured in the places we've enjoyed drinking most. And I think that's it, really. I went up to Liverpool and was talking to some people who own bars there that I've drank in, and I had the pleasure of our beer being on in the Bridewell, which was my local when I lived in Liverpool. And it's the joy of being on one side of the bar and knowing how great it can be in those places and what a great atmosphere good beer can facilitate. And then knowing that our beer is going to be in those places as well. Perhaps in the future, because at the moment we've got our pub, but the brewery itself doesn't have a direct route to market other than through the pub. We'd love to essentially have the ability to open up a tap room and have that face-to-face customer interaction a bit more actually at wherever the brewery site might be. It'd still be really quite close to where we are now, but perhaps just somewhere a bit bigger with the ability to do that. That'd be really exciting. And as for the beer, as you said, we've brewed quite a range of styles. I would like to continue to add to that range. I'd love to do a saison next year. We've got a plan to do a range of beers. I won't say too much, but which instead of focusing on places in Leicester, focus on famous people and some of the people who've influenced things outside of Leicester. And so we'd like to do some beers along those lines, and we've got some unusual ones to put into cans as well to bring out in that range, and traditional styles as well. A bitter. for example, which isn't something you often find in cans. They're often in bottles, and you don't find that featured by craft breweries. But our brewery started cask-led. Cans is something that's come to us further down the line, and it excites us to brew really good cask beer. And so it excites us to get a really good bitter out there, for example. So, and I actually think personally they're the hardest ones to brew. To brew a beer that's 3.8%, that's really well balanced, it's got that maltiness, that drinkability. I think they're actually the hardest ones to execute. There's a lot to hide behind in a juicy dipper or a big imperial stout. I think the real skill of the trade, and credit to a lot of trad brewers, who crank out incredible sessionable bitters and things. They're really an art form to brew, I think.
So which do you prefer brewing then? Are you more interested in the cask side of things or the can and keg side of things?
We started out cask-led, as I mentioned, and that's also where the pub started too. What we want to do is put some of the styles of beer that you would normally find only in keg and can into cask, and to really bring those flavours to cask drinkers, because it is a relatively new thing, newer to cask than it has been to keg or can, to bring really vibrant hazy pale ales in. Those styles were available much earlier on in keg and can. I'm passionate about cask, passionate about keeping that brewing tradition alive, but also equally the format to me is less important than the quality of the beer. Yeah. I'm very happy to put out a juicy dipper in can or keg. I mean, we wouldn't be able to put it in a cask because it just oxidise and it wouldn't taste great, even if we put it in a tin. So there are certain styles that lend themselves to the keg and can that we just couldn't bring to cask ever.
A lot of people talk about cask and keg, and it all gets a little bit confused, and people think, oh, if it's in cask, it can't be craft. Craft is in a can, and it is a real grey area. And the thing that really demonstrated to me that modern cask beer can be tremendous is when I had that one of yours. It was at the Coracle in Ironbridge. I can't remember what it was called. I had a pint of this, took it back to the table, sat it down in front of me, and oh my goodness, the colour. I'd never seen that colour on a beer from cask ever. Never seen it. So it can be done. You just don't see it very often. But that was modern craft beer on cask.
All it takes is care to be able to serve a beer on cask, which might be vulnerable to oxidation, is just to get it into the right place as well. We take care on the brewery side to make sure that our oxygen control is as good for a beer like that as it would be for keg, without compromising on the traditions of cask. It goes to a place like the Coracle, and as you said, Dave, it's turned round in less than 2 days. They know how to look after a beer like that. And those are the micro pubs. Those are the people who are serving beers like that and can look after it. And I think that's what it just takes, care. And we're putting a lot of trust as well in the trade to brew beers like that, which are heavily dry hopped and hazies. Also that bars might pull them if they've been left on a little too long, But fortunately, we've not had that. We've got a lot of people we trust to serve our beer well.
This is the thing I often think. You and all the other brewers out there take such great care to make wonderful beers, and the minute it leaves your hands, you don't know what's going on with it.
Yeah, it's really true, especially for cask. It's also why we prefer to send out some of our beer in one-way kegs as well, where there's no oxygen contact again for the beer, because we can be more assured about the quality. But fortunately, there are a number of horror stories about training in the trade not being good enough and settlemanship not being good enough. But fortunately, where our beers are going to, the micro pubs and the small independents really take good care of their beer, and I think there's an opportunity there to serve more exciting styles in cask.
We didn't actually ask you what size are you as a brewery now? How much beer are you making?
So we're 6 hectolitre, so 600 litres per batch. We say we're a nano brewery. I reckon we're probably towards the top of the nano brewery scale in terms of size, trying to get out between 10 and 12 guiles a month. So trying to do between 50 and kind of 60 hectolitres total volume per month, which isn't a huge amount. That's really quite small. And each one of our batches, we kind of get about 1,100 cans out of 13 casks or about 18 kegs. So they are all quite small releases. It keeps me very busy in the brewery. I think if I planned it again, I'd go for a bigger kit, and then I would have more time to go out and speak to the local landlords and spend some time with them, which is a very nice place to be. But it also means I don't have to be afraid. I can experiment with a batch and know that we've not got too much on the line. That feeds a lot of the creativity. And the beers that are in can, they're kind of the final iteration of a lot of prior batches. And a lot of those prior batches have made them way into cask or into keg, or just I've used a yeast that I've not used before, and I'm just seeing how it works in cask or keg first, and then we'll commit to getting that beer canned and really fixing a recipe. So there's a lot of experimentation and fun that can be had through cask and keg as well.
Just talk about putting different stuff in cans. In unheralded scenes, I haven't done this probably for a lot of episodes, probably not till early days, really.
Let's fill people in. So while we've just been talking there, Dave nipped out and he's got another can. Now, he hasn't done this since our lockdown episodes. This used to happen a lot in lockdown episodes, yes, because nobody had got to get up early the next morning or whatever. Yeah, he's just nipped off. And what have you come back with?
So I've come back with Meet You at the Clock Tower, which is your juicy New England Pale, 5.2%. Now, I then looked at it after I poured it and looked at the hops involved, and my heart didn't sink because I tasted it already, but goodness, I would never have gone for a beer. I know what I'd have done, which says a lot about me. I'd have looked at this beer on the shelf, turned it around, and I'd have seen Idaho 7, yep, fine. Galaxy, yeah, I've come around to it. Sabro, I don't like Sabro. And I'd have thought, oh, well, maybe. However, I've had it. Dave and I have had this conversation before. If Sabro is used in moderation, it's great. And that's used in moderation. And it's such a well-balanced beer. I would say, as outsiders looking in, what seem to be quite challenging hops, because if you let one run wild, you just get one of them on top, and that one dominates.
I actually love Sabro, but I totally agree with you. It has to be like the seasoning at the end in a way.
Yeah.
It can't be overdone. So that beer, relative to the Idaho 7 and the Galaxy added in at the front, there's kind of basically in the end a 3-to-1 ratio of those hops to Sabro. And to me, Sabro helps just sweeten a beer.
I think I'm scarred by when it first came out. Every brewer got it. Every brewer used it. It became pure. You just got loads of coconut beers, because that's when the taste for me, when it's let to run wild, it's just full coconut and it's not massively enjoyable. But then when it's actually been refined a bit, there's quite a lovely taste to it.
There were a couple of iterations before that, Dave, to tell you for free. So yeah, it's something you have to work on, I think. But I'm glad you're enjoying it, because that's also our kind of flagship. The clock tower is right in the centre of the city, isn't it?
Oh, it's been this so far with this and a pound has just been a lovely trip down memory lane for me. Like, I think that's probably why I ran out to get another beer. I'm just enjoying sort of not only talking to you, but sort of remembering being in Leicester and everything. It's very nostalgic.
The clock tower, for people who don't know, is right in the centre of Leicester. It's a place historically where people used to meet before mobile phones existed, and a place where people still do congregate today. And for us, it's just iconic, really. That's why we based that juicy New England Pale Ale. That's really our flagship kind of beer, that. And it took a few iterations in cask and then in keg before we locked the recipe. It's got a real blend of adjuncts in there as well, in terms of in terms of torrefied wheat and torrefied oats to help give that body to it as well.
Yeah, it's very full. I definitely get that from the oats and that. There's definitely that sort of rolled oats quality of being really full and creamy. It's a lovely beer. I really like that. I can see why you'd have it as your flagship. I really like that. I really enjoyed the lager, but I think because the sun's out, as much as I wanted the lager, it's just that bit later in the day, and I just wanted a really good hazy pale, and that absolutely fits the bill.
So you talked before a little bit about wanting to do lots of different styles of beers and different beers, but will there be an actual core range as such? And if there will be, presumably that will be one of them.
Absolutely. So Meet You the Clock Tower is fixed in that core range, as is a Leicester thing, which is a 4.2% pale ale. The lager we would love to continue with. I think there's some, and I did post it on social media actually, there's some further iterations with that, I think. I'm gonna potentially look at a new yeast and things like that. Fixing a lager in our range is important for us. The seasonal sour, it'll be there, but it'll always be alternating and be different. As I said, next year, alongside those beers which are going to form the core of the range, we will be looking to expand it and do some specials. Did I send you a can of Ale Me Duck? But that's a 6% fruity thiol IPA. So we used a thiolized yeast strain called Thiol and Lock from WHC. They do some incredible yeasts, and the flavours from that were really exciting. The thiols that get unlocked are things that you commonly find in wines and things like that. So you're getting really different flavour of profile of hops, and I think that will also be in the core range as well, because it really nicely fits between the Clock Tower and the Ouya Beauty double IPA. Because I think a lot of people really like to drink 6%. It's kind of the sweet spot, isn't it, for an IPA?
I think it is now. The chat on thiols is interesting, because we had one from Wild a few months ago now, possibly even last summer, and it doesn't feel like it's quite taken off yet, but I think it will. And it's really interesting to hear that you're already experimenting and in with that, because it felt like something that is going to come through, but perhaps just hasn't quite got there yet.
It really tends to my experimental side, because there's more to it than just this yeast that's going to produce you different flavours. There's different ways you need to brew the beer. So mash hopping is something which I've never really done before. But with a thiol beer, to unlock those precursors, so that a thiolized yeast strain actually converts precursors into fruity thiols, and you've got to unlock those. And so actually tipping bags of Cascade or Calypso or these hops into the mash was an amazing experience, really, brewing a beer and actually doing that and seeing what impacts that had throughout the process, but then also the flavours at the end, because I did one batch where I didn't do that, and then I did one batch where I did do that, and the difference in flavours was really amazing. And smells coming out of the fermenters, the thiolized yeast, it really feels like you're going into some kind of, I don't know, tropical orchard when you come into the brewery and when you take a sip out of the fermenter. It's quite an exciting thing to brew with. It's great when these new things come out, and I'm all for it, trying new things, and especially when it's a bit of an unknown sometimes and you're really experimenting. It really felt like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like obviously you've got an audience now, but you're sort of building enough trust that you've got that license to do it, and people aren't just going to go, oh, well, I just like meet you at the Clock Tower. Like, why can't I just have more of that? Are you finding that if you can get people hooked on something like that or the lager, they're then far more open to the seasonal sour or the thiolized beer and things like that?
As a microbrewery or a nano brewery, there's still a lot of thanks to give to bigger breweries who are making gateway beers, who are bringing, because let's be honest, the craft beer audience is still very narrow market in the UK versus the number of people who drink in lagers. And I think there definitely is a place for beers which bring people into more into the craft territory. And also when people have started buying a brand, they're going to start to navigate your range as well. And that's what's exciting. And that's also what's been exciting at the pub, I think, for Georgie and Jay, starting off. Also 5 years ago, some of the craft beers come on since then as well. So that's been a journey with their customers too. And it is exciting to see people progressing and expanding the types of beers they'll try. And yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. So yeah, Sour 2 will be a bit more lip-smackingly tar, I think, and a bit more adventurous than Sour 1. And that's really the aim of it too, to push boundaries as well.
That's something I'm interested in. And you touched on it before. You talked about your time and you wish you had more time to do this and that. Can you tell your listeners about what a typical day in your life as a brewer would entail and the sort of timings involved? So when you start your day, when you end your day, and what you do between those hours?
So the alarm clock goes off at about 6. Do the normal things that people do before they leave home. Get out the door. I try to be at the brewery by no later than kind of like 7:30. By the time I get in, if it's a brew day, the water's already hot from the night before. So the kit's all ready to go. The water's hot. The mash in. Now our kit, it's a bit, what could I say? And of an afterthought that we might be trying to brew 12 batches of 600 litres of beer on it every month, because we started off thinking we would just brew some beer for the pub, but it's got a bit out of control. So actually have 2 boil kettles, so 300 litres of each beer after the mash goes into each of the kettles. And it takes me a lot longer, I think, than it would a normal brewer. So I'm kind of wrapping up that brew session, having started pretty early in the morning, about 4 or 5 o'clock. So then I've got to clean down. I clean down the brewery, and that takes me to maybe about 6:30 in the evening, 7 sometimes. And then you've got all of your fermenters bubbling in the background, and beers are like children in a way. You've got to look after them. You've got to go over there, and
you never really want to leave them alone for too long, do you?
Exactly. You take a sample, see how the gravity readings are. You might be doing hot drops. You might be doing a carbonation test. And so, if I'm being honest, when the brewery's in full swing, it really is out of the door at kind of 7 o'clock in the morning and back home at 8:30 at night. And that's what you do on a brew day, So we're trying to do 3 of those kind of days a week. And then the other days are spent tending to the beers, kegging, packaging, cleaning vessels, out distributing the beer, inventory management. So it's really full on, and there's lots of different aspects to the job. And brewers are, I think, very good at multitasking. There's lots going on and emails flying in and out. It's really full on, but it's a lifestyle.
It's a case that you've literally got to be good at multitasking, because what else are you going to do? That's it. Is you've got to make it work. And I love your answer, because I wanted to try and get across to listeners the sheer amount of work it takes to get that beer from you and your brewery in Leicester to their pub or into their can. And it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard.
Yeah, it's not an easy profession to be part of. When you're selling your beer out to pubs and things, it only takes one bad keg, cask, or to lose a customer who might be putting quite a bit of your money in. So your quality control has got to be really good as well. You've got to draw a line as well. And sometimes it can be really painful. And we've not had this happen too much. We've just had one batch of casks, which I didn't let go out to pour some beer down the drain as well. So you've got to really stick by that quality principle as well, because the majority of your customers are actually pubs. And if I'd sent out 12 or 13 casks which hadn't been right, that would probably be 12 or 13 pubs. So it feels sometimes quite high risk to be brewing the beer rather than necessarily in a different part of the trade where you might lose a single customer who comes in to drink your beer. It's very different than when that's a wholesale customer who's buying a lot of beer. It can be quite stressful on that side as well. But I'm not going to, let's park those things and say overwhelmingly, it's great to be making beers which excite people and that allow me to indulge my experimental side from that scientific background and let you really play with things, because it's an art as well as a science. You're working with a living thing, which is yeast, and it's the most incredible thing to be in a partnership with, trying to make beer. And so every day is an adventure with it.
Did you ever think when you were young that this would end up being your life? You'd be making beer and running your own successful business, making this wonderful beer?
Not really until recently, I guess. No, Dave. I'm not sure that a lot of brewers
No,
are in this forever.
what did
If
you?
you're listening to your podcast,
Well,
there's
yeah.
a lot of people who've gone, you know what, there's a space in my garage there that looks like I could do a nano brewery. And then the conversations happen with the other people who might be in the house, and we're just going to make some space for this, and then things rapidly go out.
Gets out of hand quick,
It's the
doesn't
same for a lot of brewers.
What did you want to do for a job when you were younger? Can you remember?
A steam train driver, obviously.
Nice.
Great profession.
Nice.
Yeah, my gran worked on the Heritage Railway line in Leicester.
What, the Great Central?
Yeah, it's a cracking day out, and also there's good pubs.
Yeah.
You know, in the Loughborough end, there's the Needle and Pin, and you get back, you go through, and you come down into town, and you can go out to some great places like the Real Ale Classroom afterwards. So, you know, there's very many merits to it, but obviously a steam train driver is what I wanted to be. After that experience, when I was a little kid, I pulled the signals in the signal box whilst my gran was serving tea in the Rothley tap room, Rothley coffee rooms. So
I've been in there.
I know I'm the interviewee, but craft beer podcast, like
What it is we're obsessive people, and when we do something, we can't just have a beer and put it down and that's it. We've got to tell everybody about it and share our love of the industry with other people, and hopefully infect a few other people with our enthusiasm as well. I think that's all we want to do, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. Like you say, I think craft beer as a whole lends itself to obsessive personalities, because it always seems to come through when we meet brewers who have a scientific background. That always there's becoming a bit of a checklist. If you've got a scientific background and all you want to do is experiment and all you want to do is read books about brewing, so when you're not brewing, you're thinking about brewing, and if you're not thinking about brewing, you're reading about brewing. And then for us, it's like we just like talking about beer, and if we're not thinking about beer, we want to try another beer, and if we're not trying that beer, we want to probably try the other beer, and it just all sort of lends its. I think one hand washes the other with it all.
I don't think we could stop doing this podcast now because we think we think about it too much. You know, sort of wake up in the morning and search the socials for any new breweries we might have missed the day before. You know, it's ridiculous, but yeah, we enjoy it.
Can I ask you guys a question? Because we've spoken about a core range of beers. Having listened to obviously a few of your episodes, something that always excites you guys is new. So as a craft brewer, as a small nano brewery, I've got this thing where a lot of our stockists want a core range of beers that are going to be consistent and go out to them. And maybe that's because some of our stockists aren't really got only a craft beer audience. You know, they're selling other products as well and things like that. How do you perceive a core range? You know, a beer that's going to stay. Would you go back to it if you like it, or are you always going to choose and navigate towards that new beer on the bar?
I think I'm slightly coming round to the fact that if you'd have asked that a year ago, I'd say I wouldn't be that fussed. I'd always want new. But now I kind of always want a couple of go-tos in the fridge. I don't need loads because I'll always still end up picking loads of new ones out. But I've found, as from being a checker, which Dave and I both 100% are, I'm now just starting to come around to the idea of, well, I really liked that. Yeah, I'll get that again. I wouldn't say I'll get it again every week or every month, but maybe every 2 to 3 months, I'll go get another can of it. That's where I am. What about you, Dave?
It's also a question of, we may be checkers and may love a new beer every few weeks, but
we are also the minority as well.
We're the minority. Yeah. We won't be. Most of your customers will not be like that. They want to pick up one of your beers and have it again and again and know it always tastes the same. So I think the happy medium, probably to satisfy everybody, is a small core range, then a series of rotating beers.
I've found it with friends who have sort of got into it a bit because they know I like it, and they've sort of ended up embracing hazy pales and stuff. The beer that they'll always go for if they see it on tap and there's like a long running thread and conversation about it, Steady Rolling Man. If they see it, they're happy, and they'll have pint after pint after pint after pint if we're out. So it does work. If you can get that one sorted, and those people, like, they're now at the point where they'll go to Tesco or Sainsbury's and things like that, and they'll be like, oh, what's new? But if they're out and they see Daya, they'll now have other Dayas. But if they have Steady Rolling Man on, they're like sorted. Doesn't matter what else is on them, I'll have that. So it definitely does work.
So I think what that says is actually your core range can be really small. It doesn't have to be big. But if you've got that one flagship beer that everybody in Leicester thinks, oh, look, there's that, that's we know that's good, we'll have that. It's having confidence in it, and I think it's a consistency. When you make a beer like that, it's got to be consistently good every time, every single time. As I'm sure you know, it was preaching to the converted, but that you touched on it before. With traditional breweries who make bitters, their main thing is they've got to reproduce that beer again and again to that same standard every time to make people go back to it. I think that's the same.
It's good to hear. As a small nano brewery, I don't need you to drink it every week, but once every few months, if you're going to go back to our core range, or if people are, I think that's important for small producers, because that's enough. Yeah, craft beer can be sometimes a place where everything seems to need to be new, but also from a brewery's perspective, it really seems like a big important part of your business to get permanent lines with people. And as you say, people are going to come in and then drink 5 pints of your beer and know that beer's always on in that bar, and they're always going to get a decent pint if they go there. Yeah, it's good to hear. Good to get your opinion on it, guys.
Me at the Clock Tower now, if I was next up in Leicester and I knew that was on somewhere, my friend that I'd come up to see, I'd go, right, let's go here because we can have that on cask or keg, and that would at least be 2 pints. If there was nothing else on, that would be another 2 pints. So it does register.
I think we're at the stage now where if you go to a pub or a bar and there is only one beer on that you like and say it is Clock Tower, we'd just be happy staying in that pub for a couple of hours just drinking that one beer.
100%.
Like Dave says, maybe a year, 2 years ago, we wouldn't think, we've had that. We want another one. We want another one. Go somewhere else. Yeah. But I think as you get older and you learn, you're just happy with a nice, good quality beer, aren't you? You don't need something else. So I hope maybe that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, a small range. Also, to invest in the artwork for a can and to then get the beer canned and things like that, that's big for us. So often they're going to become core range beers,
Yep.
And where the experimentation happens and it's easy to have a customized clip, change the name and things like that. We do that in our kegs and our casks first.
It's a big thing, isn't it? The label's on a can. You change it to you have too many new beers. It's a lot of money every time, isn't it? Before you've even put your beer in your can, you've dropped a few £100.
Well, I think as a brewery, you have to make a conscious choice. And I think there's people like us who have gone all out there with vibrant, really different designs for each of the beers in their range. And when you're a small brewery, that kind of, in a way, means you really need to be confident in that recipe and know you want to run with it a period of time in those cans. Or you've got breweries which have like an identity. You've got your Pentriches where the artwork stays quite standard, but the beer changes all the time. Both work, but one allows you a bit more flexibility with a standardized design, but maybe less opportunity with the craziness. You have to make that conscious choice, and we've gone down that choice to have really differentiated designs on each of our cans, and so we don't have the flexibility at the minute to be doing a new beer all the time, which is also why the seasonal sour worked for us. We're going to have the same can design. Maybe we'll change the colours on it, and the description on the back, of course, will change in the things which are in it, but we aim to stick with that design.
I think there's also something to be said for not releasing a new beer every week.
I think this is almost something that started in lockdown where people were buying a lot more small pack at home and stuff. And, these breweries were putting out a lot of beers, 3, 4, 5 different beers a week. People were buying them all because they've got nothing else to spend their money on. And some breweries are still doing this now. And it's just, is it really necessary?
I've tuned out to them personally. I might try one every 3 months.
It's almost like you have too much choice sometimes. Yeah, less is more sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's potentially getting that way. I think the market got a little bit saturated because every brewer realised that if they chucked out, especially in lockdown and the sort of year or 18 months after, if you kept chucking out IPAs and everything, people were just going to keep buying them because they didn't really have anything else to do, as Dave said. And now we've had probably 18 months or 2 years now of the world getting back to normal, and it's just a bit, I'd rather have a really good beer than just another beer. Anyway,
we should probably do a little wrap-up bit, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I can see you've just got darker and darker in your room, Harry. Suddenly conscious it's quite late.
Look, we've really enjoyed talking to you. This is a really fascinating story. If people want to get hold of your beers, and we advise they do because they're excellent. We've had 3 beers between us tonight, the lager, the sour, and the one Dave just had. We were really impressed.
Meet you at the cocktail.
So what's the website address if they want to buy us anything online?
www.millhillbrew.co.uk. Get onto the website. There's all of our can stock on there. There's some nice deals. The more you spend, the better value the beer gets. And if you want some merch with your beers, there's some money off that too. And if you're in Leicester, come see us at Mill Hill Cask and Coffee, or look out for us on Untapped if you're in the city. We're really privileged to have some great people stock us in the city centre and further afield. So if you're wanting a beer on a draft, you might look for the Real Ale Classroom. You also might look for the Two-Tailed Lion. And if you want some cans, the Londis. And further afield, if you're out in the county, Wistow, and just look up on Untapped and you'll find this. And I think one of the things we will do is add a little thing where our stockists are on the website in the future. But over £50, I think it's free delivery on the website, and there's discounts the more you spend, the cheaper the beer gets.
Superb. Look, we wish you well. From the beers you've tasted so far and the enthusiasm that sort of shines through, I'm sure you're going to do very, very well.
Thanks both, and the same to you too. Good luck with the podcast, and I really will look forward to listening to the future ones that come out. I have 40 minutes between home and the brewery, and the morning is one bit of the podcast. And
perfect.
The way back, and to disperse with other things, other podcasts, American Homebrew Society and things like that. So, it's real good listening, and been some beers I've bought as a result of your podcast too. So
this is Daft About Craft. Get in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram at Daftaboutcraft1.